This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 335 of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions, your one-stop shop for all things compliance related. I'm extraordinarily pleased to announce a new service offering, the Compliance Alliance, which is a three-step program that will provide you and your team a background into compliance and the FCPA so that you can consider how your product or service fits into the needs of a compliance officer. It includes a intensive boot camp training for your ELT or top sales team, sponsorship of a podcast series, and in-person training on specific sales techniques to compliance officers. Interested parties should contact Tom Fox at tfoxlaw.com. That's tfox at tfoxlaw.com. Today I have with me back a good friend of the podcast, Mike Volkov. Mike Volkov and I actually take a deep dive into the weeds around blockchain and how blockchain can be used by the compliance profession and compliance professionals going forward. I think it's a fascinating podcast. It's certainly a fascinating topic, and it's something that you, the compliance professional, need to be aware of because it may revolutionize the compliance practice. The episode comes in at around 25 minutes. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. Volkov, you have written about blockchain, and was a little surprised to see you do it, but I was extraordinarily pleased to see you do it as well. So why don't you tell us how you got introduced to this topic and where you see this going for the compliance officer and the compliance function?
Well, I thanks, Tom, for the opportunity to discuss this with you. I happened to be at a conference in Singapore where you introduced me to the folks there, and it was a fascinating conference. But one of the presentations was on blockchain technology. IBM representatives were there, and they put on a presentation about how it can be used. And IBM, I think, is one of the leading companies in terms of developing the technology. But I've always wanted to understand it more, but they did such a great job in the presentation. And they showed how this could be applied specifically, like in sort of supply chain management. And I was so impressed by it that, to me, applying it in the compliance context is a no-brainer. Now, I know there's some issues still, and there has to be more universal acceptance of the technology, and the cost has to come down, but I think it's going to happen eventually. And the idea of having a shared, immutable ledger with transactions that cannot be altered, are digitally protected, and cannot be altered. And literally, you can't go in and scribble and erase an entry. You add on to just a chain. You add a new block to the chain, and it keeps going on and on and on. The idea of a distributed ledger and the security of it is just fascinating, I think, for compliance practitioners. And I think, and I'm a real advocate that, this is on a small scale, Tom, but, I've seen clients and companies that were doing due diligence, through paper. And then they moved to a third-party platform. All the, products are out there. And lo and behold, they're happy. They have much more time to devote to chief compliance officers, to other issues. And it showed to me the value of technology, and that's really the future here, is not to ask for 100 more bodies, ask for 20, and then a budget that includes new technologies. And it's used in the Bitcoin application, in the Bitcoin service, but it has the potential, to me, to be revolutionary in terms of auditing, monitoring, and so many other supply chain management, that it really could knock the socks off of, exactly, and I don't mean socks by Sarbanes-Oxley, but it has the potential to do a real great service and leverage chief compliance officers. I don't know. What did you think?
So, Mike, I guess a couple of things struck me about your article and what you said, and where I would really like to take this conversation on blockchain. The first one is that it creates, as you said, an immutable history, meaning it can't be altered. And one of the problems with spreadsheets in Excel is they can be altered, and you don't have a auditable trail. You don't have an audit history. You don't have a change history. You don't have a track change by who made the changes. So it certainly opens up that sort of manual recordation is subject to manipulation and fraud. But with blockchain, it's really two parts. It's a transaction, not necessarily a financial transaction, really any node of information, as they would call it, and that's the block. And then it's put together in the chain. So that's how you come up with the name blockchain. And I guess I see for the compliance practitioner multiple applications. You talked about due diligence, and when we in the compliance world talk about third parties, we're largely focusing on ownership. Are we doing business with either a nefarious person or a government official or an employee of a state-owned enterprise hidden through some type of shell corporation or other clouding or fogging up of ownership structures? That's what we're focused on. And this blockchain speaks directly to that. So we would have the opportunity for there's full transparency and ownership that can be audited, that can be looked at, it cannot be changed. So that kind of satisfies one current area of third-party due diligence from the compliance world. But Mike, where I see this going is it's going to give the chief compliance officer and indeed the compliance function just an incredibly much broader way to look at due diligence. So for instance, we can start looking at financial health and financial reporting. You can look at the finances of a company, because one of the things blockchain allows you to do is, and a great example I saw was in an article in the MIT Sloan Management Review called Blockchain Explained. It's if you go into a bar and want to order a drink, you might be asked for your driver's license. Now, I recognize you're not going to be asked for that, nor am I, but there probably are some people.
I hope we are.
Are carded. Well, when you're and the bartender is looking for your date of birth to make sure that he can legally serve you a drink. But when you show your driver's license, you show a lot of other information. So height, weight, driver's license number, home address, and those are completely unrelated to the specific inquiry or compliance that bartender is trying to engage in, which is to make sure that you're over the age of 21 or whatever the legal age for drinking is in the state or other jurisdiction you're in. Blockchain allows you to give the specific information or allow a person or company to view the specific information that they need and not all of the other information. So it satisfies a privacy concern. But when you can look into the financial information, it is exactly as you said. You can see if one, is there an invoice from someone new or different that shouldn't be there, but also you can see the financial health and overall spend of third parties. So if you think about a couple of recent or a couple of FCPA enforcement actions involving Oracle and Mondelez, where they were sanctioned by the SEC for not being able to determine where their distributors in India spent money for marketing. Well, blockchain would give them visibility into that. So you can start to look at the financial aspect of due diligence, which is typically something that is only done through auditing now. So, and which is an expensive, time-consuming, and separate speciality from the chief compliance officer or the compliance function. So it gives you the opportunity to take a look at the financial side. It certainly would allow you to take a look on the sales side of things to determine who you're selling to, and I bring that up in the light of this week's announcement by the Department of Justice. They are seeking civil forfeiture against a former Texas-based company called Coastal Industries, Coastal. And Coastal was bought with money that allegedly came from the 1MDB Malaysian sovereign wealth fund that was stolen from them.
Yeah.
And so it's led to me to question, if you're a company now, do you need to do due diligence on the people who are offering to buy your company? Not just the people who are selling for you, not just the people you're going into business with as joint venture partners or some other strategic relationship. But what about now? Do you need to worry about that? Because Coastal is now being subject to a civil forfeiture action. Now, the government is not asked to take over the company, but they're going to get some, or seeking some remedy. And if Coastal got money from that was stolen from 1MDB that was part of the sales price, that's subject to being forfeited back to the government. So blockchain could work towards solving that problem. It could also work towards things like in human resources. Blockchain would enable organizations requiring specialized talent and capability to better obtain information about potential contractors and partners beyond simply the ownership information. Are they properly credentialed? Can they deliver the services they say they're going to deliver? All of this information could be available in a transparent manner. You also hit on the provenance of certain products or services. I think you used the example of fish, but it could easily go to conflict minerals. It could go to extractive energy. I've got a friend that developed a tool to show the provenance of honey that was imported in the United States to show that it did not come from China. And apparently there's an entire trade ban against Chinese honey coming into the United States for completely different reasons from what a chief compliance officer would normally worry about. But if you can determine the provenance of the services and goods in your supply chain, it could probably or possibly at least help you from securing both financial fines and penalties for importing goods you couldn't import, but also the huge reputational issues that we've seen U.S. companies have around child labor, around slave labor, around goods that were conflict minerals, conflict diamonds, or anything else that really can reputationally harm a company. So I really see
but Tom, you've raised some. I wasn't even sort of focusing on all of those types of issues that are just more than significant. You're talking about sort of company threatening type of issues where you can sort of avoid reputational damage through blockchain. To me, I was sort of looking at it, internally and in terms of this. And the one other thing I would throw out to you is, and see what you think about this, is the contract rules that you can install in your system, such that if any of those parties you're talking about violates a contract rule, you get immediate notice. It's not dependent upon an audit that occurs a year later or something else that happens. But I wasn't even thinking about it in terms of the broader issues. And also, now you're also raising the possibility that if I have a buyer, I have to do due diligence and I have to get warranties as to where the money that they are coming to me to buy my company or buy whatever whatever they're going to buy, that I have to make sure that money isn't illegal proceeds now. That's what you're suggesting.
Well,
right?
it's not what I'm suggesting. I think that's the law now.
Yeah. But what you're saying is, and you're right, this new sort of aggressive kleptocracy initiative, people now have to make sure that they know that, and that they confirm that this money that they're receiving isn't illegal proceeds. I think you've raised a lot of difficult issues, but the one thing that I heard about at this presentation is it's not. There's still, the cost is still sort of high, but don't you think that's with any new technology, it starts out like that and then comes down with use and with greater acceptance?
Absolutely, absolutely, and you're right. We're at the nascent stage of this, but I just and the contract you brought up, absolutely, I think that's going to be a critical area for obviously legal, but also in the compliance space, because how often does a chief compliance officer find out a contract's been executed some point thereafter, and the compliance terms and conditions are not in there? The compliance officer was not given the opportunity because they were never told that a potential third party or other party subject to the compliance terms and conditions was even being considered by the company, and that the business guys went ahead and did it. Well, if you have that written into your rules, you would receive notice of that as the chief compliance officer, and you could append the appropriate compliance terms and conditions, and then, as you said, be notified on a detection the detection prong in addition to the prevention prong after if there's a violation of the contract. So from the legal / compliance perspective, I see lots of applications on that as well.
So like you could also, and I asked them about this, you could set up invoice rules. In other words, let's say I have a particular relationship and we have invoice rules on what are permissible charges under a contract or a purchase order. And if those rules are violated, I would then get a notice. Now, the transaction may have just occurred, okay? But think about the difference between, hoping that an auditor or an accounts payable person finds this down the road, where I, as a chief compliance officer, get a notice of this right away. The idea of sort of real-time intervention and real-time compliance monitoring, to me, I'm not saying we're all going to be sitting in front of a bunch of screens, but the idea of getting these notices and a technology where there is a shared ledger, distributed ledger, where it is, like you said in the beginning, immutable. It's there. You can go find the transaction. Nobody can go in and change it. Nobody can try to cover it up. Think about how that protects your internal control system also. You cannot go in and to circumvent controls. How do you circumvent controls now? It's a much narrower way of circumventing your internal controls, assuming they're defined and, you have notifications set up. To me, it's an incredible opportunity to, bring greater control over sort of financial and compliance and all these operations that occur that we are otherwise trying to find out about 6 to 12 months later in an internal investigation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So you bring transparency, but you also bring the specific information to the person who needs to see it to make a determination of whether a remedial or appropriate action is required. So it's a new technology. It was really developed around Bitcoin, but I just see so many implications for applications to the wider corporate world in a number of disciplines. And certainly, obviously, I've been talking about the compliance perspective, but from the finance perspective, from payables, from internal audit, from HR, from anti-money laundering, if that's not under the chief compliance officer, export control, import control, all of those can benefit from having that sort of transparency and coupled with visibility immutably that can't be changed.
Yeah, I'm happy to, if anybody's interested, I can connect them to the IBM folks who are, working on this and to follow up. They are doing real world applications of this, but in projects for people. And I use the example of the supply chain for fish. And the other thing you mentioned about sort of maintaining control of the location of or the origin of certain products. One of the most difficult areas is actually pork in China, which consumes or produces like half the world's pork. Is that farmers were bringing all their pigs to this sort of location. And we had a scandal years ago when heparin, a drug that's made with from pork bellies, was and people died from tainted heparin, and it was traced back to this market in China where they couldn't determine which farmers were bringing which pigs. Think about, and now IBM is actually getting involved in this project now to track those pigs and create a traceable way to get back to who was the producer of each, pig farmer. And think about the revolution. I mean, that makes safety that much better and traceability for numerous products. But this happens to be a drug that's used. Heparin is used for blood clots and things like that. It's a huge market for clotting and things like that. So what you've pointed out here, I think, is just a huge revolutionary idea to not only compliance, but other aspects of business. But I hope that compliance, will jump on the bandwagon and see the value of this. I offered my services, but of course, where that went, Tom. I said to IBM, I said, look, I would love to work with you guys and help on the compliance angle, how to put together a package of applications that would be helpful to chief compliance officers. But IBM has bigger ideas on their mind right now. So, but nonetheless, I just see its application, and I hope you can keep the issue up in terms of making sure it's still, people are aware of it and follow up on it in the compliance arena. I mean, I think, I'm going to try to follow developments in it.
Well, we're going to link to Mike's blog post, my blog post, and a couple of articles I've seen on this in the show notes. But you're absolutely right, Mike. I think this is going to be something that we both need to watch. The greater compliance community needs to watch. And it really is going to be, it could be a game changer in ways that we can't even portend at this point. As always, it's been great, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. I'm going to link to our blog posts that Mike and I have had on blockchain in the show notes, as well as a couple of articles that I think will be helpful for you to get into this topic. Also, if you've listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast. It would help in our rankings and help get the word out about the oldest and leading podcast around FCPA compliance. Finally, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report, and I hope you will join me for another episode soon.